Welcome to the Rock is George podcast. I'm your host, George Dionne, and this is episode 77. Thank you for tuning into the podcast through our website, rockisgeorge.com, on our YouTube page, on one of the many podcast streaming platforms, or at knac.com. My guest for this episode is CHRIS Impellitteri. He is the guitarist for the band that bears his last name, Impelletteri. He has a new anthology release out. It's called Pake The Beast. It's a 3 CD compilation that collects songs from their 1987 debut EP all the way up to their 2010 studio release. I had the chance to catch up with CHRIS to talk about the anthology and what he has planned for the future of Impelletteri. So here's CHRIS to tell you all about it. If I knew absolutely nothing about Impelletteri, how would you describe the music to me?
We're a disease. How would I explain the music to us? Well, I've been told we're basically high energy metal, a lot of screaming vocals, a lot of technical shredding guitar solos, fast double bass drumming. Gosh, I mean, now that I say that, because you just asked, it almost sounds like we're almost like a thrash band with melodic vocals, technical guitar playing. I guess. I'm just thinking off the cuff. Literally, I never really thought about that.
No, I'd say that's pretty spot on. And you mentioned that you're a disease, and you're a disease that just keeps spreading. But you're going to be releasing an anthology on September 30th called Pake The Beast, the Impellitteri Anthology. And it pretty much is a best of your catalog from 1987 to 2010. So that's a good disease to spread.
We like to think so. I'm sure some of our critics would beg to differ, but we'll stick with that.
This anthology is part of your new deal with Global Rock Records. They're re-releasing your back catalog up to 2010 digitally, plus they're putting together this anthology. So how did this deal with Global Rock and your catalog come together?
For many years, there's a lot of, at least the people that follow our band know that we primarily released our records in Japan and certain places in continental Europe. And our labels, our label partners, they had legal rights to those masters, which means we couldn't release a lot of music outside of various territories because we didn't have legal ownership. So we kind of always vowed that as soon as we could get the rights back, right, that would release everything globally, meaning every country that doesn't have access to our music through retail channels, we would finally reach them. And so it was actually, we allowed a person named, his name's Giles Lavery, to manage the band. We've done it for many years, and we really kind of kept a very close circle of who actually influenced our business decisions. So we let this guy Giles in, who I really like, and he's really passionate about the band. And it was really his idea. He brought this to Global Rock and said, look, Impelletteri are already signed to JVC Victor and Frontier. So we already have labels that are working with us with our upcoming real release, right, of our new record, all of that stuff, and our most recent albums. But the back catalog became free. So we decided to go to a label, which is called Global Rock Records. And we did it because they were really passionate about the band. You know, we could have gone to a much bigger label, but I don't know if they would have given us any attention or any credibility. You know, we might have just got lost in the, hey, here's another one by Warner Brothers, but it just gets lost. No one promotes it, you know? So that's how this evolved and why we're talking today, you know?
Well, Giles seems to be bringing together all these kind of classic 80s guys, kind of the shredders, or sort of the projects that didn't get seen the first time around, because I know that he's done work with Jack Starr, and I know that he's done stuff with Graham Bonnet's project, Blackthorn. So I know he's kind of getting these back catalogs to get kind of new ears on them. Would you agree that that's what you're doing with your catalog?
Yeah, I would say that's fair. I mean, I know Graham Bonnet. I don't know the other artists. I mean, a lot of people, again, I don't know so many of these bands. For us, we're in that, it's hard to explain the challenges we have as a band. You know, Impelletteri in the United States of America, outside, yes, in the late 80s, we were on MTV a lot. And we sold a lot of records, and we built this really nice cult following. But in places like Japan and certain places in Europe, the band exploded. And don't ask me why. I don't think we're better than anybody else. I don't know why we've sold as many records as we have, or the venues we play overseas are massive and we can headline. Problem has always been, how do we reach other markets, right? You know, really where we let Giles in on this was, how do we make our music accessible at a reasonable cost, right? Because a lot of people were always curious about our band because we became so insanely big in Japan, right? And that success spilled over into other countries. And unfortunately, a lot of the people that were interested in the band and attained our music, they had to do it by spending a fortune on these crazy import prices, right? Or exports. This was really a concept to figure out, well, how do we reach this audience where they can have access to our music reasonably priced, right? And so that's really the idea. I don't think it was, hey, let's bring this brand that maybe didn't get enough attention, right, and try to make them bigger or whatever. I think maybe that's what you're alluding to, but we never needed that. We've already sold millions of records. We play overseas. Our last headlining show we did, I think 30,000 people came to see us. And I don't mean that, I'm not boasting or bragging, but I'm just saying it's an odd conundrum where we can do some of this stuff overseas where the band it's quite successful, come back here and no one even knows who we are, or it's just they don't have access to us. So really that's what we're trying to do, is we're trying to change that with this release.
Were there any issues obtaining all the rights to your back catalog?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And that's why it's taken so long to get this body of work legally where we could release it, finally to the masses. And believe me, that's frustrating as an artist. Music's like your children, and it's like, whether it's great or bad, you try to get that distributed globally, but there's so many conflicts. I mean, even to this day, our label in Japan, who I love, we've been with them since 91. There will be conflicts with our label in Europe and America. Who gets more songs, who gets a bonus track, who gets a different, like an advantage release date, right? Like a week early or whatever. As an artist, it's just like, oh my God, do I really have to deal with this? I just want to play my guitar,
So when you debuted, you had Rob Rock on vocals for your debut EP. He returned after an album or so, after Graham Bonnet came on board. I guess what I wanted to clear up is where Rob Rock started off with the band, and he's pretty much been on most of the albums except for two. What happened with the switch from your EP to Stand in Line with Graham Bonnet on vocals?
I'll try to expedite my response so this isn't a long story. But so when we did the Impellitteri Black EP, Rob and I, we had, especially in our early years, right, teenagers, we played in a club band called Vice together. And we really learned our craft, how to write songs together. We also did cover music, so we had to learn from the same artists, right? So we kind of learned how to create music similarly, right? And so when we came to LA, we did the Impellitteri Black EP with the focus of, first of all, this is going to be a band, right? It's not the CHRIS Impellitteri solo ego guitar show. So never been about me. It's been about the 4 or 5 guys. So it's really very band focused. And what we really wanted to do is we wanted to be a band that kind of would sound a bit like, I guess, Iron Maiden and early Van Halen on steroids. And so that was really what our focus or goal was. And so we did the Impellitteri Black EP. Immediately, I mean, maybe it was luck or whatever, we started getting a lot of media coverage, especially in places like, Europe, right? Kerrang! Magazine, who at that time, for people that don't know, they were like the biggest rock or hard rock magazine in the world at that time. And they covered us. They gave us 5-star out of 5-star review, instantaneously branded me as like the guitar player. I think they were the first one who called me the fastest guitar player in the world, which, by the way, I hate. It's not true, but I think it was Kerrang! That started that whole thing. So anyways, we had all this buzz building. We played some live shows in LA and around the country, and the band just started really getting some momentum. And Rob Rock comes in one day and says, "Hey, I want to talk to you." And he drops the this horrible ball on us saying, "Hey, I'm going to go do something else." He's working with a producer named Dieter Dirks, who was producing the Scorpions. And so Rob left the band, and we're like, oh my God, we just got signed to Sony and Relativity. We owed him a record, and it was like, well, we're screwed. Because Rob was half the sound of the band, is that voice, And so I remember crossing Graham Bonnet's path, and Graham and I were friends, good friends. And I remember we started talking. He's like, "Hey, how you doing?" I'm like, "Yeah, I'm doing good. How's the band?" Kind of bummed. Our singer left. It's almost like the Van Halen story when Dave left and Sammy came in, right? At a much lower, smaller level, but it was very much like that, right? It was like, yeah, we lost our singer, and we're taking off, and all these people are interested in the band, and now what? Graham had just ended his band Alcatraz. And, they had quite a nice run on their first two records, especially in Japan and Europe, and a little bit of success in America. So Graham and I started talking, and, it basically led down to, well, let's sit down and see what we could do together. And I knew immediately when I started writing, remember I said when we started with Impellitteri, the Black EP, it was almost borderline thrash band, right? But with Graham, I didn't think we could go in that direction. He was a legendary rock singer, and he had a very unique style. And so we wanted to make sure the music we wrote complemented his voice. So with Stand in Line, we literally just did it's almost like did 180, and at this point we know, well, we can't take him down that aggressive metal, or we didn't think we could at that time. We decided, why don't we just do more of a tribute to your band Rainbow, that when you were in Rainbow, it was a big success and people loved doing that. It was a little odd for me, but we went down that direction. The first song we wrote was the song Stand in Line. And I actually wrote that riff on a keyboard. I'll never forget when Graham presented his lyric, he literally sang it to me, got chills. I was like, oh my God, this guy has such a unique voice, such a talented individual. And so we just kind of went down, or we deviated from our path of just hardcore metal band into more of a European kind of, clone of Rainbow kind of, And so that's kind of how we ended up going down the Graham road from Rob initially.
And how did Rob come back?
So Rob will come back, and then Graham will come back. So we're going to have a little bit of a seesaw. So Stand in Line, we do the record, and in Japan and places like that, and please don't ask me why, because I don't have an answer, but the band exploded. And I don't mean like, we got big, like you can't be big in America, you go to Japan, you're popular. No. This was stupid success, like all of a sudden we were competing with Metallica and Ozzy, and, we come out of our hotel rooms and there's 1,000 girls, and it's just craziness, right? In Japan. And so it really exploded, and then we were on MTV. They played us quite a bit with song Stand in Line, and it got a lot of traction, a lot of leverage, right? And I remember we came back to the States, we played Japan, we played the Tokyo Dome, which was 65,000 people, but we played it. Billy Joel was on the bill. There's all these crazy artists. The band really just started getting some momentum. We came back to the United States, we played some shows, and I remember the last show we did, we played the San Jose Civic Auditorium, and it was completely sold out. It was a co-headlining thing. It was Impellitteri and Pat Travers' band, right? And Pat Travers at the time was a very popular artist, I think out of the late 70s or whatever. And so we played the show, and it was insane. We went over really well. It just one of those just amazing nights. We drove back to Los Angeles. Graham got on a plane, went back to Australia because he was having some marital issues with his wife at the time. So he's going back to work everything out. And we get a call from our manager, and they like, hey, we have great news. They're like, what? You're gonna do the ending Iron Maiden tour. You're gonna be Iron Maiden's support act. We're like, yes, this is a game changer for us. We were gonna start in Florida. I forget what arena, but we were gonna do that. And then here it goes again. We get a call from Graham and love Graham. It's like, I can't come back. Trying to save my marriage. It's, it's in shambles, whatever. So Graham's out. And at this point, we're like, oh God, what do we do? Here we go again. It's like, so at this point, we're not doing Iron Maiden tour, obviously, because we don't have a singer. So, at this point, we did a cattle call, and we actually had a lot of surprising, very large vocalist artists that wanted to join the band. And for life, I'm like, why? You're bigger than us, but okay. So we actually did audition a lot of people. For some reason, the chemistry wasn't there. It just didn't feel right. It felt like an attention grab. We put you in the band. Yeah, we're going to get some mileage out of it because of who you are. But musically, it just doesn't sound right. Ultimately, we made the call to Rob. His thing with Dieter, it just didn't work. They spent a year trying to do a record for RCA Records. It may have gotten released. I don't even know what it was called, but it didn't work. So Rob was free, and he realized, I think he made a big boo-boo too, because we had so much momentum on the Impellitteri Black EP. So he came back to the band. Now at this time, now we're basically getting towards the end of the 80s, we're around 89, 90, right? And as you can imagine, the scene in America is changing completely. And for us, Impellitteri, yes, we come out of the 80s, but we were never a hair band. We couldn't relate to those bands, To be honest, we'd relate much more to bands like Anthrax or Metallica than we could to a Bon Jovi or whatever. So that whole scene was dying, but there was a gift. I don't know if it's from God, the universe, whatever it was, because Japan, we had so much momentum coming off the Impellitteri Black EP and Stand in Line. We got signed by a label called JVC Victor. Not sure what it was. By the time we hit the record Victim of the System with Rob, the band, we just started selling out all the venues. We were on TV and radio shows. Our records were selling. They were just doing well. To this day, the label told me, I guess we've sold a few million records, over in those areas. It just took off. And at the perfect time too, because most of our peers, they were dying because they were so reliant on the United States. And all of a sudden the tastes of the industry, they were no longer welcome, And so a lot of these people were struggling to have a career, and they were trying to build their careers in places like Japan as well. But we were so far ahead that, we were literally, even to this day, we're still competing with the Metallicas of the world there. Where, in America, again, people go Impellitteri. They're like, what disease is that? They don't even know who we are. We go there, it's a whole nother world, So.
So who's in the current, besides you and Rob today, who else is in Impellitteri 2022?
So the same bass player, James Pulley's been with us since 1991. Our touring drummer's been Patrick Johansson. So Patrick's been playing with us for years, right? Doing the touring thing. So it's been pretty much the same 4 or 5 guys. And we use a keyboardist named Edward Harris Roth, who I think he first worked on our Screaming Symphony record. And so we've had the same lineup pretty much going forth since that period of time. Really haven't we did deviate at one point, which is a record called System X, or Graham Bonnet came back for one record, which I think we did in the year 2002.
Are you currently touring or planning a tour, like a greatest hits tour, to support this release?
We are going to tour, but we're in the middle of doing a new record, and we actually started it during the pandemic. We probably have about another 4 or 5 months to go to finish it. Once the record's done, we're going to target, and I'm not sure if this is correct English, it's the latter part of the middle of 2023 of what we're targeting, or early summer, for a release. And then I guess our manager have already submitted our names for a lot of the big European metal festivals. And then the idea is to play any date we possibly can that financially makes sense anywhere in the world, so start to build the band live, because now we have the music, the body of music to support the live stuff. I guess the answer is yes, but it's no, not specifically touring behind this record release. It's what's coming next after it.
So your new record is not for Global Rock. Is it for Frontiers?
Correct. It's for JVC Victor and Frontiers. Frontiers, they have the rights for Europe and United States, and JVC have all the other territories in the world. I think they've got Japan, Korea, Australia, New Zealand, all of those other territories.
Do you have a name for the album yet? Or is that top secret?
I think I've already spilled the beans. Right now, the working title, which could change, right now it's called Devil in the Details.
Do you have any other music projects that you're involved in? Bands today seem to have their hands in many different fires.
I hate that. I can be careful, because this will end up, as CHRIS Impellitteri said, and it'll be on all of the metal sites or whatever, But it's like, I've always been in a band. Yes, I've had offers to join other big bands and stuff, but you know what? I've never been one of those guys where I want to be in 5 different projects at once. I know there are a lot of people that do it in this day and age, and there's nothing wrong with that. Occasionally we will use drummers on our records for studio stuff that play with other guys because they're so good. I want them, right? But the reality is, I just, for me, growing up as I'll give you an example. I was a huge Van Halen fan. If you would have changed, if it would have gone like, hey, we just replaced Alex and I get another drummer, and that, or Alex is playing in 5 other bands. He plays with Ozzy, and he plays with, I don't know, Nirvana, and he plays with, I'd be like, I always felt like when I followed a band as a kid and I was a fan, I felt like I was part of their family. And I don't want to see mom and dad have affairs. Mom's now sleeping with this guy and dad's sleeping with that woman, and they're cheating on each other all the time. I know that sounds silly, but that's how I kind of feel with these band guys. They play in 20 different bands. They're like, dude, what band are you in this week? I also think it doesn't give your band very much credibility. Do you really want to invest your time and interest and be passionate about this artist? Kind of like when mom and dad keep having these affairs, I mean, that's the best way I can explain it. So the answer is no. And I do get offers, but I'm usually like, no, dude, I don't want to do it. I have done projects in the past, but really out of a favor to our record company or something like that.
So what bands have courted you over the years?
Not going down that road. Made that mistake about a year ago, and it hit blabbermouth of a big artist that called me, and it's like, it's flattering when you get those calls, but it senses for me to say it because I don't do it, it doesn't matter. And, for me, it's like the one really cool thing about being in this band, and Rob says the same thing too, with Impellitteri, it's a great creative outlet because we start with a blank canvas and we just do what we want to do. We don't have to conform to someone else. We don't have to be told what to do because, hey, we've built this, we've established this sound, you got to conform to that. It's like, no, we just do what we want. So, and that's the nice thing about being in this band. That's it. That's my response, So I wish I had a more cool one, like, oh yeah, I'm working with, these guys now. But
Well, I would think working for Frontiers, they must have asked you to work on tons of other projects because that's kind of their thing.
I do believe getting a call from them at one point saying, hey, would you be interested? My immediate response is absolutely not. No, 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 not interested. I don't want to be in this built-in band. I mean, you tell me, what is your thought about that when you see these bands playing with 800 other artists?
So the issue, I can see the financial standpoint of it, but I think with a lot of these projects, and I'll name Frontiers right off the bat, they're just to make an album and that's it. There's no, how do you build up a base if you're on to the next project or you're off to the next band? How do you build anything behind this thing that you created? So you could take one currently I can think of is they have one with James Durbin and I think a guy from Striper and a guy from Riot Act and stuff like that. But they have other bands that they work on that are a little more notable. So how do you build something behind that supergroup? So I could see, I mean, a good album's a good album, but it kind of, to what you say, it's not really a band.
Yeah, and your thoughts about the mom and dad cheating on each other? I mean, does it feel like that? If it's a real band,
Again, I think it kind of goes with, okay, if they do something that produces something good, there's a value to that. But if they just do something to do something, I don't think there's a value to it.
good point. Yeah, I mean, listen, and I'm not saying anything negative about these albums that these labels put together where say, hey, we're going to put all these really cool players, because if you're a fan of music, that can be very interesting. Like, oh wow, what would it sound like if this guy played with this guy and they wrote together and created something? This could be unique, and as a fan, that's totally viable. So I love that Frontiers does that. I think it's really cool. But for me, I've struggled in my career, and even Rob too. There has been that connotation of, oh, Impellitteri is just like a Steve Vai or a Satriani or Yngwie, which is completely wrong. I've never ever. First of all, I love all those people I just mentioned, but I've never wanted to be that ever. I wanted to be in a heavy metal band. My favorite band as a kid was Van Halen, especially early Van Halen. And so for me, I've always said, look, I'm no more important than our singer, right? I mean, you take Rob Rock out of there, or even Graham Bonnet on those records, right? The records wouldn't sound right. You put a guy that, had no vocal range, had a rough, whiskey, kind of raspy voice, our records would sound like shit. Forgive my language, but it wouldn't work. So, I've been a team player. I've always been like, let's get the best players, but we've got to have a vision and a destiny all for one. So that's why I'm like that. And so when I do get those calls, it's flattering, but usually my response is no. And I've gotten calls from some very big artists. And even then my response is, thank you, I'm flattered, but no. And, a lot of people always go, well, yeah, but why not do it for the money? Well, dude, you can see our success in Japan. I don't need the money. I don't mean that arrogantly. Forgive me. I don't, but it's not about the money. It's about doing what we love.
So let's take the band aspect out of it. Have you ever thought about getting into producing other bands?
I have actually. It's really finding the time. I do love the studio. I'm a studio geek. I'm one of these guys that when we track our records, we got to do it. A lot of times we use places like NRG Studios, great vintage old Neve console, great outboards, Pultec, EQs and Fairchild compressors. I'm one of those guys that, working with great equipment, you really can capture your sound that live sound, but really get this amazing organic quality, sonically speaking. And I do love that, but it's really about the time. I mean, doing a record today, it's a lot of bands don't have huge budgets, and to try to go into these kind of studios that we go into, it's cost prohibitive for them. So, but yeah, maybe someday in the future, maybe I will branch out and start doing that, because I'm really passionate about that. And I think you can hear it on our Impellitteri records, especially when we started doing the JVC years, from like 91 or 92 on. You can hear our productions got really big because we finally had budgets. I even bought a recording studio at one point, so I really learned how to be a good engineer as well.
So as a guitarist, how many guitars do you have in your collection at this point?
Not as many as you would think. I have some very, very nice older guitars, there's no doubt, but I probably have about maybe 25 guitars. And the reason being is I really make sure that every guitar I own, it's an amazing playing guitar first. It has to play really well. And then sonically, it has to sound good. Right. So I do that instead of just hoarding instruments, and having them in, a bunch of our storage places. Right. I pretty much have all my guitars at my home, and they're like tools. I mean, right now on the new record, I have probably a handful of guitars that I keep leaning on that I just go back to. Right. And, that's kind of who I am, because a lot of people think, oh, you must have hundreds or thousands at this point. Nope. About 25 of them. And they're all amazing guitars.
What kind of brand do you find yourself gravitating towards?
I'd probably say there are three that I kind of gravitate towards. On a lot of the records, especially the previous two records and this new one, there are three, actually, no, four guitars that get used the most. I have a Charvel that was actually custom built by Grover Jackson and not Wayne Charvel, Mike Shannon. These were the original Charvel builders. So they built a Strat. It's insane. Plays great, sounds amazing. Looks a little weird. It's white with all this blood all over it. People have seen it live, but it's just an amazing sounding guitar. And then I have a 58 Les Paul. I used a lot of that on the Venom record. I have a 1971, we call it the last of the Four Bowl, which was like the Hendrix year Stratocaster that I use on these records. And I play live a lot. That's an amazing guitar. And then recently on this new record, I actually bought a 1975 Gibson Flying V, which I love. And it's on a lot of this new record. So those four guitars are really like the workhorses at the moment. And then of course, the amps are, that's always revolving, changing, new record, new amp lineup, but
so you don't do any, run your gear through computers. You kind of do it the classic way. Everybody's doing their tone. Well, I shouldn't say everybody, but a lot of people are doing their tones through computer programming now.
Yeah, no, real amps, although that's not completely true. So like on this new record, I'll say this. So I've always been very loyal to Marshall, right? But on this new record, I'm actually using these old vintage Mesa Boogie Mark II amps or Mark IIIs. It's a Mark III blue stripe. Heads. It's actually what I think John Sykes used on the White Snake record. They're just very aggressive sounding. I have one that's modded, just sounds killer. So I'm using that one a lot on the new record, but I'm also using Fractal Audio. I've been actually using their modeler. So we blend that in with the real amps, right? So, of course we run through the old vintage Neve mic pre's and EQs because that's how you get a really good sound. I've never just plugged straight into a computer and used their libraries of sounds. That's just weird to me, I feel like the amp makes you play a certain way, It's like when you capture a tone, it kind of guides you in a direction. And it also feels more authentic to me than just a sample.
Well, those are all the questions I have for you today, Chris. The new album is Pake The Beast, the Impelletteri Anthology. Comes out September 30th on Global Rock. And then you have the new studio album coming out next year through Frontiers and possibly a tour to follow.
Yeah. Yep.
I want to thank you for coming on the podcast. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Well, thank you for having me, George. I'm honored, and thank you so much for spending time with us.
Once again, I want to thank CHRIS Impellatteri of Impellitteri for coming on the Rock is George podcast. Be sure to check out Pake The Beast, the Impelletteri Anthology, out now on Global Rock Records. Stream it on your favorite music app. If you like what you hear, make sure you buy a physical copy. Support the artist. For all things Impelletteri, head over to impelletteri.net. I also want to thank John Lappin of Lappin Enterprises for making this interview possible. You've been great. I've been George Dionne. I'll see you again soon.